All the hints that had gone unnoticed, all the time that Taehyung had spent oblivious whilst Jungkook conducted and orchestrated situations specifically so that he'd figure it all out. All of it, and none of it had mattered, because Taehyung, the unobservant, knew nothing. Because I'm madly in love with you and you're leaving me. Jungkook knew what he'd said, he knew that he meant it, and he knew that he was going to regret it with his entire mind, body and soul the day, but right at that moment, it felt like the only thing he could have said. "You're what?" Taehyung was quick to respond, taking an immediate step back. He was shaken by the confession, confused, shocked and overwhelmed, yet not angry or upset. If anything, it made him feel less so. "Jungkook, I'm sorry." It was Jungkook's turn to apologize, but for quite a different reason. "I'm so sorry. I wish I didn't, but I do. Always have." It was all coming out now. The stream had begun and it wasn't going to stop just yet. He wasn't ready to stop yet. Keeping it to himself had been difficult, and there was almost a sense of relief now that it was out in the open, though there was still a lot more to be said for the both of them. "But you're..." Taehyung realized 2 words into the statement, that it was wrong. Jungkook, quite evidently, was not straight. "Oh, can't help it," Jungkook stammered, beginning to pace. He felt the weight of the situation, but he didn't want to. He didn't want to think about how this changed everything, and how Taehyung was probably going to stop talking to him now, and how they'd never see each other again if Taehyung left and Jungkook was crying. Jungkook Lightwood did not cry. Yet there he was, in the middle of Taehyung's apartment, tears running down his cheeks in what felt like an endless stream. And surprisingly enough, he felt like that was the worst part. Taehyung was seeing him cry. Taehyung was watching him break, and Jungkook felt completely exposed. "Don't, Jungkook," Taehyung pleaded. However, it was kind of too late for that. The tears weren't going to stop anytime soon, and asking him not to cry wasn't helping any. It made Taehyung feel equally as uncomfortable, though. Jungkook was usually so strong and masculine. It was odd to see him look so fragile and afraid. It was even worse knowing that he was the cause of that. "Please, I'm sorry," Jungkook sobbed, trying to wipe his eyes with his jacket sleeves. His voice was thick and desperate, and neither of them liked the sound of it. Taehyung wanted to pull him into a hug and promised that everything would be alright, but he didn't do that because he knew that wasn't going to make things better, only worse. Jungkook didn't need that kind of reassurance, and Taehyung wasn't willing to give it. "This isn't your fault," Taehyung told him, but Jungkook didn't believe him for a second. "I didn't even realize you had anyone to care about like that. Never thought for a second it was me. I'm sorry," Jungkook repeated. "I need to go. I need to get out." He turned around, wiping his eyes and rushing towards the door. Taehyung was quick and eager to follow, bounding up behind him and grabbing his friend's wrist tightly. "Not yet, please," Taehyung begged. "Jungkook, we're not done talking. I have so many questions and you're leaving." Jungkook cut in, shaking his head. "You're leaving, but at least now you know how I feel about you. You don't have to stay in touch, if you don't want." "I get that, but I can't stay in." Jungkook, Taehyung whispered, unsure of what else to say. Suddenly, all of those questions had been forgotten. He just didn't want their goodbye to be like this. After almost a lifetime of friendship, he felt they deserved something better than this. No ending could be a good one, not after something like this, but they deserved a dignified goodbye at least. "Please don't go, leave this. Please." Jungkook thought about it for a few seconds, but he knew that he'd regret staying. It could only get worse, and Taehyung was leaving anyway, so what did any of it matter? He wasn't going to turn around and tell him the feeling was mutual, nor would he change his mind about the course and stay. "Don't you dare leave like this, Jungkook," Taehyung said, though it sounded more desperate than cold. "Watch me," Jungkook whispered. He leaned forward, pressed a small to Taehyung's forehead, which wasn't exactly the spent half his life dreaming of, but it was the closest he could have, and at this point Jungkook was willing to take what he could get. "Goodbye, Taehyung." Taehyung watched him leave, just as Jungkook had told him to, although he hadn't quite meant it so literally, and then slammed the door shut, wondering how everything had gotten so fast. Nightclub, Jungkook was thinking the exact same thing. It was the first place he'd found that looked decent enough. He'd downed 3 more shots since arriving, and was flinging himself about in the middle of a crowded dance floor. It was his attempt at letting go, but it wasn't going all that well. He thought the alcohol would have helped to clear his head more, but it did nothing more than make him feel more careless. It had loosened him up in the worst way possible, and opened the gates to self-destruction, but that's what he thought he wanted, or so the alcohol told him that. The loud music was supposed to drown out his own thoughts, but all it did was make them scream louder over it. And the people? They were mere distractions, only they weren't working all that well. Jungkook got distracted. After 10 minutes of drunken dancing, he retreated to the bar, buying a proper drink and then going to take a seat in one of the booths by the side of the dance floor. 2 of them were empty, and Jungkook took the one nearest to the door. He sat, slurping his drink and watching the drunken students try to flirt, dance. His eyes were drawn to the people, but his mind was still on Taehyung, wondering if he'd made a mistake leaving him. Staying wouldn't have changed anything though. Taehyung had his mind set on leaving, and the other thing was beyond his control. He finished the drink in under 5 minutes, and returned to the bar again, leaning right across it as he waited to be served, staring at the multicolored bottles lining the wall. Jungkook didn't notice the man beside him, chuckling at his incredibly dazed and drunken state. "How many shots have you had?" the man asked. Jungkook heard him, but he didn't turn to physically acknowledge the guy. "Those bottles are pretty," he replied, tilting his head. The man laughed again, and Jungkook turned to look at him. Taehyung stared at him, grinning foolishly. "What's funny? You're wasted." Taehyung shrugged. He took a step closer to Jungkook, talking into his ear so that he didn't have to yell over the music. "Or maybe you're just a little weird." "Both," Jungkook said. He turned to look at Taehyung beside him. There was a clear height difference, but not an awkward one, and wore sparkly liner underneath his eyes. Jungkook took note of how pretty he was before anything else. "What's your drink?" he inquired. "Something alcoholic," Jungkook snorted. He laughed at himself, then stood up properly, running his hand through his hair. Taehyung was served first, and ordered himself 3 shots, and Jungkook just 1, because he didn't exactly need much more, did he? They found themselves screaming along lyrics they didn't even know that they knew on a dance floor surrounded by equally as drunken strangers dancing against people who were probably too drunk to even know where they were. Jungkook wasn't complaining though. It was what he had wanted to do. When they eventually retreated back to the seating area, Jungkook felt much calmer, and Taehyung was completely out of his mind. It was as if he'd forgotten the previous events of the night. The entire reason he'd come to the club was to find a distraction, and it had actually worked. Jungkook leaned in, his hands taking a grip around Taehyung's face as their lips brushed together. It was what both of them had wanted to do since the minute they saw each other, and Taehyung was relieved it was actually happening, not that he had expected things to go any other way. Rejection wasn't something he faced often, and from the sloppy, desperate way Jungkook him, rejection definitely wasn't going to be on the cards tonight. Or at least Taehyung hoped. When he pulled away, Jungkook leaned back and again, desperate, Taehyung him softly and then stood up, beckoning Jungkook to follow. "We should go somewhere else,"